right up through my front. I looked at it. Well, I had a choice. Could have walked back to the car, or stand on that board and pull that thing right off that rusty nail and go see Gus. Hi, Larry, what are we here for today? He says, yeah, I think I'll give you a tetanus shot. You'll be okay. All of that to say, Epicurus thinks that there are times when we have to consciously decide to go through pain in order to get to a greater level of happiness. Is Epicurus right? Question. Is Epicurus right?
If you're only feeling happy, the feeling of happy kind of dies off. So you gotta have the highs and the lows.
Gives you a better balance between what's really happy and what isn't. Now, am I happy they put me through all that treatment? No, I'm not happy about it at all. If they were to do it again, I don't think I'd do it. I have no idea what it's like to be chemoed almost to death. It's poison, people. They're trying to poison the cancer. It doesn't know one cancer from another. Even when they try and target it, it's still going to kill healthy cells. You have to learn to deal with it. Who else? Epicurus. Is he right? Why is he right?
Sometimes the best things in life are hard to find.
And oftentimes you can't avoid them, people. You can't avoid them. You have to go through them.
10 millionaires went bankrupt before they became millionaires.
Bernie made off with all your money. You don't have to shoot someone with a gun to kill them. So a lot of people took their lives, lost everything they worked for their entire life, invested with this
The guy
fool.
who tried to, was in the stock market or something, and tried to get people with a lot of money to invest, and I think his son killed himself too.
Yeah, he committed suicide too. Now Bernie didn't, but other people lost everything they did, their whole lives, everything they invested in suddenly gone overnight. They believed in a lie and their lives turned out horrible, and they take their own lives, they commit suicide. Who else? Was Epicurus right? How many of you, I don't want to know personal stories, how many of you have gone through adversity, painful, and you come out the other side and you're okay with having gone through it? There's some people that aren't okay with having gone through it, but it happens. So Epicurus he presents us, what is the good life? He says it's a life of moderation. He doesn't have a problem with pleasure. But he said if we deal with fear and rationally we accept the fact that some of our choices have to go through pain, we will find ourselves in a better place when we examine life and we make the evaluation of whether life was really a good life or not. So the question here is good life. Is happiness a part of it? Anybody want less? No, we all want more. So happiness then becomes a part of it. How do we define happiness? Epicurus tells us sometimes it's a good feeling and sometimes it's at the end of a painful time, but yeah, we're really, overall, when we look at it, yeah, I'm glad I made it through that. It was worth the effort to get here, even though it was an unpleasant thing to go through. That's Epicurus. Any questions about Epicurus? Okay, the second one and last one we'll do today is John Stuart Mill. His teacher is Jeremy Bentham. He believes in what we call the principle of utility. You'll see this in the notes spelled out. What's useful to life? Principle of utility. For him, he calls it the principle of happiness. It has a word picture for it. The greatest happiness for the greatest number, or the least amount of unhappiness for the least number of people. He says we have a moral obligation to increase happiness where we can. The upside of that is minimum wage. Right now they're talking about giving people $15 an hour instead of $8. Well, I did the math. The wealthiest 10% own $9.2 trillion in this economy, and it's going to cost them $850 billion to give everybody a living wage rather than a minimum wage. So that means they're only going to have $8.3 trillion left to buy their yachts with. Right? And they're not going to be happy. But 100 million people make minimum wage, and I bet they're going to be happy. The greatest happiness for the greatest number, the least amount of unhappiness for the least number of people. Well, it's a good formula. We use it all the time. But the problem with that formula is sometimes, because some people are extremely happy and other people aren't, we can create bad situations. I have 10,000 Romans in the Colosseum delirious with joy and 3 Christians about to be eaten alive by hungry lions. Well, 10,000 to 3. The greatest happiness for the greatest number. Well, you can't cause unhappiness in order to make yourself happy. Racism, you can't cause unhappiness to make yourself happy. Slavery, you cannot cause unhappiness to make yourself happy. You women got the right to vote in 1920. They always emphasized the right to vote. That's not what that was about. In this country, to vote, you had to be able to own property, and until you got the right to vote, you were property. You belong to your husbands. The legacy is you still take, or some of you still take, his last name. It's a sign of ownership. Your kids have your last name. Who do they belong to? You. Do you know where your child is tonight? And if they do something wrong, oftentimes you're brought into the equation. So when you got the right to vote, suddenly you became self-ownership. You want to divorce the booger? Go ahead. Now you have the right to. You want to set the course of your own life? Go ahead. Now you have the right to. Principle of utility works both ways. Has an upside when it works right, where all the greater number of us is happy. When it works on the downside, we say that's not morally right. We have to make those changes. So we take away from that law and we use another one, maybe like moral virtue, maybe like moral duty, maybe like virtue ethics and ethics of caring. We try and find substitutes when the theory doesn't work right. But we use the principle of utility almost all the time in this society. We're always trying to make people happier than not happy. And it's a moral mandate to make the most happy that we can. We find a law that isn't working right, we change the law to try and increase people's happiness. So that's the upside of John Mill's theory of principle of happiness. Now, his teacher said, well, how do we calculate the greatest happiness? And he said majority rules. I have 20 over here and 30 here, and so this is the greatest happiness. And that turned out to be a really bad formula. So Mill says, well, I have a different idea, still based on the principle of happiness, the greatest happiness for the greatest number, but he recognizes that there's two kinds of happiness. There's physical and intellectual, and both of those will bring you pleasure. So he presents this argument to us. He says, let's say you have 100 people who have experience of both. You can't compare something if you don't have an experience of it. So they have experience of both physical pleasure and intellectual pleasure. Which do you think they would decide most, give a decided preference to? Well, we have to understand what he's talking about. Physical pleasure, 20 minutes of pleasure a night. Everybody knows what physical pleasure is. How about intellectual pleasure? How about you save someone's life? Doesn't that feel good? So Mill says, okay, so we have people who have experience of both. Which would they give a decided preference to? So a year from now, I say, well, remember that physical pleasure, that 20 minutes a year ago? You remember that, right? And you go, no, not really. You remember when you saved that person's life? Just like it was yesterday. So he'd say we would give a decided preference for intellectual pleasure over physical, but for John, he doesn't care. Pleasure's pleasure. Don't be sad, be happy. Whatever makes you happy, whatever puts pleasure in your life is acceptable to John. Well, that makes sense again, too. Physical pleasure, intellectual pleasure. If you work hard and get an A in the course, you're going to feel happy about that. Will that give you pleasure? Well, John's theory comes with a problem. How do we calculate people's happiness? Are you happy? Yeah. Scale of 1 to 10.
8%.
8.5. Are you happy? Scale of 1 to 10.
10.
10. Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy? What calculus can I use? Well, we have this thing called a cost-benefit analysis, and it works, as long as we're not dealing with people's happiness. So 1974, we have the first oil embargo, and all the major car companies are building these little eco vehicles, and Ford builds a Ford Pinto. Very popular car, sells tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them. The problem is rear-end collisions, the gas tank's at the very end, and the gas tank will explode. 200 people die over a period of time, people are injured. Ford Motor Company does a cost-benefit analysis. They realized for $12 they could weld a piece of steel under that tank and it would provide almost maximum protection. But it would cost them something like $13 million. Then they took a look at repairing the cars that were broken, that were in accidents, paying people's medical bills, and then they came up with a figure of $200,000 for a dead person's life, someone who's killed in an accident. And when that came out in court, people were outraged. Well, how'd you come up with $200,000? Military people, for a long time, 100,000. You die in combat protecting. Now it's up to 400, and I heard you can pay to get even more. You can get up to $1 million worth of insurance, but you have to pay for it. Well, who came up with that figure? There's an older lady in a car, went through McDonald's, Her nephew was driving the car. The lady wanted a coffee to take with her. Put it in her lap. She's wearing sweatpants, which are very water and liquid absorbent. She went to pop off the top, and it spilled all over her genitals. She went through 3 operations. She second-degree burns on her genitals. Went to court. McDonald's wanted to pay for the hospital bill. The jury decided to award her $2.6 million or something like that. McDonald's took it back to court. They settled for about $600,000, I think. So your genitals are worth $600,000. Your whole body, I don't know, maybe $3.8, $4 million. The problem with Mills's theory is there's no way to calculate happiness. We all want to be happy. I asked you how many wanted more rather than less. We all want to be happy. And the aggregate for Mill, the way you add it up, is the greatest happiness for the greatest number. How do we calculate it? Well, if it's just nuts and bolts, I can do a cost-benefit analysis. That's not difficult. But when it comes to human lives, 10,000 Romans, 3 Christians, how do I calculate happiness? And Mills doesn't have an answer. He realizes there's a conundrum. We do the best we can, but in the end, it's guesswork. And if you're on the short end of the stick, you are not happy. And if you're on the long end of the stick, you are. Is that fair? Is that just? Because life isn't just about numbers. Life is about fairness and justice. At the end of the semester, we'll get to justice equals fairness. What makes a life worth living? Isn't justice a part of it? Isn't fairness a part of it? Is equality a part of it? At least equal opportunity? We'll get to that. And how do we calculate that? You took your best shot and you didn't make it. Do I owe you another shot? Oh, Professor Pollard, do you think you could open the quiz up for me again? I kind of... Well, what do the rules say? With 104 points. The end of the semester, you have 89.4. I built it extra credit. Get out of jail for I built it all in there. Take your best shot. I have 89.4, can't you? Well, sure I could. I'm in charge. I can do what I want to do. Now, do I have a right to say, well, what would make you happy? Well, you know, I didn't earn it. I can live with 89.4. Really? How many of you would vote for 89.4? Extra credit, everything you work for? It puts me in a really bad situation. I'm trying to calculate your happiness. And I don't got a calculus. Some people say, okay, I accept that, that's cool. And other people, ooh, you wouldn't believe the language people can use when they're upset and not happy. What am I supposed to do? 89.7. College one year, and I want to go to Berkeley, California, University of California at Berkeley out in San Francisco. Needed a 3.0. I had a 2.98. Guess what they said? I said, you're kidding, 2/100ths of a point?